Hello, Telesur English presents a new episode of China Now, our media's production that showcases the culture, technology, and politics of the Asian giant. In this first segment, China Currents divides into the top stories of the week, such as China hitting back at Trump's tariffs, China launching military drill around Taiwan Island, and Chinese rescue teams saving and helping the affected people of Myanmar after the earthquake. Let's take a look.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on the latest developments in China. I'm Mimi, and in this episode, China hits back at Trump's tariffs. China launches military drill around Taiwan Island. Chinese rescue teams achieved a miracle in Myanmar. First, China's turn in Trump's tariff war. On April 2nd, Trump announced a 34% tariff hike on Chinese goods. China's Ministry of Commerce swiftly introduced 3 countermeasures on April 4th, delivering not only an economic blow to Trump, but also significantly undermining the US defense industry's capacity to provoke a third world war. First, China declared that starting April 10th, it would impose a 34% tariff on all US imports, with agricultural products like soybeans and corn bearing the brunt, applying targeted pressure on Trump's voter base. The New York Times admitted that it will hit hard. According to the US Department of Agriculture, in 2024, China consumed 14% of all US agricultural exports and took in more than $27 billion worth of those exports and related products. On the other hand, Carlos Mera, head of agricultural market research at Rabobank, told Reuters, Brazil will be by far the main beneficiary, the biggest supplier that can replace US soybeans to China. But others could benefit too, including Argentina and Paraguay. On wheat, Australia and Argentina should benefit. Second, China announced export controls on 7 rare earth minerals and their compounds, directly exposing weaknesses in US defense and technology supply chains. Taking samarium as an example, its primary commercial use is in manufacturing samarium cobalt magnets, which are critical materials for high-performance motors and precision gyroscopes, essential to satellite and missile production. Reuters highlighted that China accounts for roughly 90% of global rare earth supplies, causing concerns among US aerospace manufacturers like Lockheed Martin, producer of the F-35 fighter jets. While the US government has stockpiles of some rare earth, but not enough to supply its defense contractors in perpetuity. More crucially, a 2014 University of Michigan study identified samarium hexaboride as a vital material for quantum computing. In June 2024, the University of California announced new breakthroughs in research on this compound. However, the ripple effects of Trump's tariffs have cast uncertainty over the commercializing of such technologies in the US. And third, China's Ministry of Commerce added 11 US entities to its unreliable entities list, banning trade and investment activities with Chinese firms. Drone XL analysis revealed these 11 companies are the backbone of America's $9.2 billion drone industry. Take Skydio as an example. The company ignored Beijing's warnings to engage in military technology collaboration with Taiwan. Additionally, as disclosed by Jewish Voice of Peace, the Israeli military ordered dozens of Skydio reconnaissance drones in 2023, later deployed in Gaza for military operations. In 2024, Yale University police used Skydio's military-grade drones to surveil student protesters. Jewish Currents reported these drones to assemble dossiers on suspected students, to later punish them. Now, Beijing finally decided to stand up to these American drone companies. DroneXL noted that US drone production lacks the scale to quickly replace Chinese supply chains. Scaling domestic capacity for components and rare earths could cost billions and take years, straining budgets. Beyond China, the EU and Canada have also rolled out countermeasures. Yet, on April 6th, the United Nations reiterated that nobody wins in a trade war, aligning with China's long-standing stance. Yale University's Budget Lab research indicates the new tariffs will raise US prices by 2.3% in the short term, equivalent to an average household loss of $3,800. Not only American citizens, but also US businesses stand to lose. Reuters reported iPhone prices could surge 30 to 40%, eroding the competitiveness of this iconic product and creating opportunities for rivals like Samsung. Rosenblatt Securities Crockett noted, "Our quick math on Trump's Tariff Liberation Day suggests this could blow up Apple, potentially costing the company up to $40 billion. Said, "It's hard for us to imagine Trump blowing up an American icon." Trump's tariffs are drawing global investor criticism. On social media platform X, Trump reposted a post claiming Warren Buffett praised Trump for the best economic move in 50 years. However, CNBC reported Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway promptly issued a denial, with Buffett himself stressing he would refrain from commenting on economic policies until May 3rd. In contrast, on April 6th, China's Ministry of Commerce hosted a roundtable with 20 US enterprises, including Tesla. Earlier, following Tim Cook's participation in the 2025 China Development Forum, Apple announced a $99 million expansion in China focused on clean energy. Apple COO Jeff Williams stated, "We're honored to deepen collaboration with suppliers across China to drive innovation and progress for our shared planet." Clearly, US companies and investors prefer aligning with the builder of the global economy over a disruptor like Trump. Chinese strategist Professor Wang Xiangshui observed that Trump, an unsuccessful businessman, has proven destructive rather than constructive in managing the world's largest economy. One key challenge he poses is America's increasingly closed market, which China cannot prevent the US from committing suicide. However, China's development of its domestic market and sustaining trade with other partnerships will provide stability in an uncertain world. Meanwhile, regarding the Trump administration's relentless, self-defeating policies, the Chinese embassy in the US seemed to deliver its final response as early as March. If war is what the US wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we are ready to fight till the end. Moving on, from April 1st to 2nd, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, conducted the Straight Thunder 2025A exercises around Taiwan Island. The US State Department criticized the drills, stating they would exacerbate tensions and undermine cross-strait peace and stability. However, Chinese media outlet Guancha argued that the exercises are conducive to regional stability. In 2022, following Nancy Pelosi's irresponsible behavior, the PLA conducted rapid landing drills as a warning. But by 2024, the Joint Sword series began shifting focus, placing more emphasis on the Navy's blockade capabilities alongside amphibious landing operations. In the latest Straight Thunder 2025A exercise, landing operations were further downplayed, while training increasingly focused on the sustained control of air and sea domains, and on coordination between the Navy and Marine Police to implement a regular maritime blockade. This evolving approach reflects a strategic shift. As reunification by force becomes a less daunting prospect for Beijing, a prolonged blockade is seen as a more cost-effective means of helping Taiwan separatists to recognize reality. One example lies in energy security, a key vulnerability for Taiwan. Taiwan separatists often claim the island maintains 4 to 5 months of strategic oil reserves and can hold out until US forces arrive. However, as Guancha points out, Taiwan's energy self-sufficiency is extremely low, with over 97% of its coal, oil, and natural gas imported by sea. During the Joint Sword 2024B exercise in May 2024, foreign LNG carriers avoided the PLA's drill zones, resulting in 3 consecutive days without LNG deliveries and reducing the island's natural gas reserves to just 1 week. Similarly, during the recent exercises, the Taida 2 LNG ship was unable to enter port due to live fire drills. On April 3rd, Taiwan's United News outlet acknowledged that the mainland had exploited Taiwan's energy vulnerability. Moreover, on April 2nd, while the PLA conducted its drills, commercial satellite imagery showed the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group transitioning into the South China Sea. However, instead of approaching Taiwan Island, it deliberately kept its distance and headed straight for the Middle East, offering no tangible support to Taipei. These developments suggest that through a series of increasingly sophisticated exercises, Beijing has effectively exposed the weaknesses in Taiwan separatist narratives and bring the regional situation back on track. Next up, on April 2nd, more than 120 hours after a powerful earthquake struck Myanmar, Chinese rescuers pulled a 52-year-old man alive from the rubble of a collapsed hotel in Mandalay. According to China Daily, this rescue defied staggering odds, occurring well beyond the critical 72-hour survival window and under scorching temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. This man, now recovering in stable condition at a local hospital, was trapped beneath the hotel's 3 collapsed lower floors. Team leader Yue Xing of China's search and rescue team revealed that advanced life detection equipment pinpointed his location. Rescuers drilled downward from the ground level, using an endoscope to locate him. Remarkably, the survivor had sheltered between 2 beds, shielding himself from debris. He had a pot of water and ventilation, key to his survival, Yue noted. After establishing contact via translator, rescuers administered saline and spent hours carefully extracting him. The operation involved China's International Search and Rescue Team, Hong Kong rescuers, and Shenzhen rescue volunteers. Blue Sky Rescue and others have worked over 100 hours since arriving on March 30th. So far, the Chinese rescue teams have saved 9 lives. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave it below. See you next time.
We have a short break, but don't go away because we'll be right back. Welcome back to China Now. Today, Thinkers Forum's Welcome CEO gave call researchers Louis Vincent Gave, Professor Xu Lan, and Professor Shannon Weiwei. Let's see.
Trump this time around is very different from Trump the first time around. Trump the first time around was always tweeting about the stock market and talking about the stock market all the time. Trump this time around has a much bigger challenge on his hand because few people realize this. Few people even remember. But 5 years ago when COVID hit, and it was pretty much exactly 5 years ago, but 5 years ago when COVID hit, US corporates went out and borrowed a lot of money because all of a sudden interest rates were at zero. So they all issued record amounts of debt. They all issued tons and tons of corporate debt. Now, most corporate debt in the United States is 5 years. So they all have to essentially roll over the debt over the next second half of this year, first half of next year. And this is the big problem for Trump, is that as all these corporates roll over debt at a much higher interest rate, they're going to stop capital spending. They're going to, fire people. They're going to have to reduce their expenses. And it might be enough to push the US into a recession at precisely the wrong time, because it'll be just before the midterm elections. And the last thing he wants is the Democrats to win, because then if they win, they're going to say, oh, impeachment this and et cetera. And then he's got like 2 years where he's just fighting the Democrats. So I think if you're Trump, your main goal today is I need to get the interest rate down, because otherwise the corporates can't roll over their debt. So he's doing everything he can to cut interest rates, which means reduce government spending, arm twist foreign governments into buying long-dated bonds, and talk down the growth. So, the policy right now in the United States is pointing towards lower bond yields. If you get lower bond yields, you also get a lower US dollar. Now, against that, the third policy, the third leg of the stool for Trump is he wants to get lower energy prices. And I think that's why he was very keen to throw Ukraine under the bus, because essentially he wants Russia to start, basically producing more oil again. Pre-Ukraine war, Russia was producing roughly 10.5 million barrels per day. Now it's producing 9 million barrels per day. Russia needs to have Halliburton, Schlumberger, and other Western oil service companies to upgrade their equipment to go back to producing a lot. So the Trump policy is very simple. They want lower interest rates, lower dollar, lower oil. Doesn't mean they'll get it, but that's what they're trying to do. Now, so it's no longer about trying to drive the stock market up. These are the three goals. So that the tariffs seem contradictory with that goal. So here the big question is, are the tariff a goal in themselves, or are they a tool to get something else? And I still think the tariffs for Trump are a tool to get something else. And what he wants to sit down with Xi Jinping in June and tell Xi Jinping, look, either I'm going to put a bunch of tariffs, or you got to buy a lot of my bonds. I'm going to issue some 50-year zero coupon bonds, and you're going to buy those. He's going to say the same thing to the Europeans. He's going to say the same thing to the Japanese and to the Koreans. It's okay. You guys have big trade surplus with me. So either I'm going to put tariffs to reduce the trade surplus, or you take the trade surplus and you put it into 50-year zero coupon bonds. Because when you listen to the rhetoric of Trump, it always comes back to the same thing. He's always promising it's okay, the foreigners will pay. The Mexicans will pay for the wall. Like the budget deficits will sell citizenship for $5 million a pop. The tariffs will pay for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. It's always foreigners will pay. I think if you're China, your big fear when Trump was elected, so 2 months ago, 3 months ago, the big fear had to be not that Trump would put a bunch of tariffs on your goods, because you don't really care about that anymore. To be perfectly blunt, if you go back a decade, Chinese exports to the United States were 8% of Chinese GDP. Now it's 2.7% of Chinese GDP. So it doesn't matter that much anymore. Look at what China exports to the United States. To be perfectly honest, you look at what China exports. Roughly, I'm sort of rounding the numbers, but roughly 20% is Apple. So if the US wants to put a bunch of tariffs on Apple, so be it. Like who cares? Another 20% is high-end electronics. And that can't go anywhere because it's complicated supply chains. That can't move to Vietnam, India, or wherever else. Then you've got 20% of, sort of high-end machine tools, high or low-end machine tools like the Black & Decker or like Johnson Motors, all that stuff. Now, that part conceptually, that could go somewhere else. And then you've got another 40%, which is all the frankly, low value added stuff, the shoes, the t-shirts, the Tupperware, the furniture, all that stuff that is leaving China gradually anyway. It's going to places like Vietnam, like Indonesia. And I think that, the Chinese leadership, they don't really care if they lose that part. They know anyway, they're going to lose it. They're going to lose it over time. Like, shoes, plastic toys, it's like, yeah, it's bound to leave anyway. So, and again, it's like at this point, it's 2.7% of Chinese GDP. I think that's why the market doesn't really care. I think the big fear, if you were China, was that Trump would try to build an anti-China coalition, that he would go to Europe, that he would go to Saudi Arabia, that he would go to Indonesia, to Australia, to Canada, to Mexico, and say, hey, you can't do business with China anymore. You can't have them build factories here. You can't have them, trade goods with you. I'm blocking out China, and you have to do it as well. Now, I think that was a big fear 3 months ago. Fast forward to today, and now if Trump goes to Europe and says, hey, if you don't block out China, we're not going to be friends, Europe is going to say, we are not friends. What are you talking about? Like, we're not friends anymore. You can't tell us what to do. Today, if you're Thailand, if you're Indonesia, and you see how Trump has treated Ukraine, and you see how Trump has treated Canada, and you see how Trump has treated France, and like all these other countries that are nominally friends to the United States. If you're Indonesia, if you're Thailand, you think, okay, I'm going to be turning my back on China and doing more with the US? Or do you think, US is not a very stable friend. I need to do more with China and less with the US. I think you think the latter, right? The US closing in on itself opens up huge avenues for China to do what China should now do, is do friendly diplomacy. I actually think the biggest risk to all of this would be if oil prices, for whatever reason, shot up. Because we've now all been used to a world where oil is pretty cheap. And what's happened in recent years is that everybody has drawn down their oil inventories. So the US has, usually a lot of oil inventories, but right now they're like essentially at 20-year lows. China usually runs pretty high oil inventories, but even in China, inventories are pretty low. Same story in Japan. And so now I'm not saying oil prices are going to shoot up, but if you had anything really bad happening, let's imagine that right now Trump started to bomb the Houthis in Yemen. What if the Houthis turn around and say, you know what? We're going to go blow up the refineries in Saudi Arabia. Like, payback. Saudi Arabia, you're a friend of the US. US is bombing us, so we're bombing you. Because we can't go bomb the US. It's too far away, but we'll bomb you instead. And again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but then all of a sudden oil is at $100 because we have no inventories, or it's at 110, 120. And then all of a sudden you're in a very different world, one where the Fed is hiking interest rates because the inflation is much higher. And it's then, markets really sell off. And I think for me, that's the risk I worry about.
I think Chinese regulations was adaptive, more context-dependent, specific, as compared to the European regulation, where actually have a much umbrella, more broader regulations. But I think certainly in terms of comparing with their U.S. counterpart, probably our Chinese companies probably say they have much more regulations under them for the use. China actually has a very well-developed system to regulate AI companies. I think indeed, it generates a lot of benefits. The Chinese companies are subject to many specific regulations to ensure that the risks of their application will be minimized and mitigated. Chinese companies can do whatever they want. They may see that at the initial stage, indeed, for example, facial recognition was used somewhat widely, but now we see there's a much more limitations on the use of that. Facial recognition is used is in many cases there's a Chinese context actually provides actually more benefits of using, say, those technology. For example, if you think about very crowded train station, if you want to get through high volume passing through, And there, I think that actually facial recognition could be better than human checks. But even now, I think also has already been changed. You no longer need facial recognition. So I think, first of all, I think there's indeed some use, and then you have more new regulations and that limit certain use that now being viewed as pervasive and make collecting data that people may not feel comfortable. So I think there's some adaptive evolution of Chinese regulations on the AI use. I think that both the government and the industry have a very clear sense, particularly the big companies. The real challenge is how to prevent so-called the AGI that's out of human control. So that is something that indeed Chinese academia have talked a lot about, and also government policy also have talked a lot about, and also now you have a lot of the industrial so-called commitments that's provided by industrial associations. I think company have they are signing up for those commitments. So I think there are indeed a very wide range of tools that's been used to regulate AI's applications. I've been trying to advocate for agile governance. I think the agile governance is really referring to the situation that technology moves very fast. As we see that almost like every day or every week, you see some new model, new progress is being made in AI. So technology moves very fast. However, I think for people who knows anything about the government, about regulations, about those things, that moves very, very slow. I mean, you have to first understand the situation and you draft something and to go through various consultation and then to debate and then so that takes years. So by the time you came up with something, the technology has already moved. You're always playing this chasing game. So I think that's the challenge for something like AI. It's that's the situation we face. And the other thing is also because AI development is a new territory. When, for example, people are concerned about the AGI out of control, but nobody knows when that will happen, right? You wanted to explore, to push for the big model for AGI, but at the same time, at what point that becomes dangerous? So we've already, been trying to, I work with some people, technical people, and so I think defining some sort of red lines, but still, it's not easy. And so the first thing that we, after recognizing this limitations, we have to change our mindset of having this comprehensive, very covering everything, and to make sure that this not miss anything. We really have to tolerate incomplete kind of governance measures. So maybe we focus on this part. Maybe we're missing some other part, but let's go ahead. Try to get this out so that actually would provide some guidance to the industry. So I think that's probably the first thing. So you have to abandon the idea that you wanted to have a very complete set of the rules to cover everything so that nobody can make any mistakes. That's probably going to be very hard. The second thing is that related to this, it's the kind of tools you use. You don't want to use those very harsh punishment because I think it's an evolving process. Could be mishaps in companies' innovation, in some wrongly headed applications and so on. So you want to give them a signal, but not necessarily to punish them so hard so that it's very hard to innovate. The kind of tools you use will be somewhat differently. And the third thing, I think, is the relationship between the regulators and those being regulated. In the past, I think that the regulator is like a cat. Those being regulated is sort of like a mouse. The mouse is always trying to find wiggle, trying to find where are the holes so that I can sort of pass through. The regulator is like a cat. Okay, we're going to catch this mouse. If you're in that kind of a mindset, then it'd be very hard for the proper governance of the technology. The companies and the regulators, they need to have a good communication. So the companies can say, okay, we're moving in this direction, and we don't know what kind of problem this might produce, but we have a hunch something might happen in this area. And the regulator can say, well, anything related to human lives and so on, that's a taboo. You can't do that. On the other hand, on some other things, that might be possible. So you want to convey what's the government concern, the degree of concerns, and then the company can say, okay, what are the potential risks? That communication, they can strike a balance of where they want to move the technology. And that's a win-win situation, because otherwise, that the company might move in directions that actually is really worrisome to government. So the government actually to put a very harsh ban on in that area, and so the entire area will no longer be able to develop it. So I think that communication is also crucial to jointly define what are the more safe areas to work on. Because I think the companies don't know when they move forward what are some of the potential risks. The government also don't know whether this is an area they can allow the company to move forward. So I think there's some kind of a uncharted territory that they really have to work together to say, okay, how we can balance the innovation and the risk. In the Chinese papers we published, we call this joint ignorance. We can say we are all learning. I think in terms of joint ignorance, I think it's from different countries also. I'm sure that there are indeed a lot of things that China is doing. I think people outside China do not know, vice versa. So I think though at least those are the three areas I think an agile governance approach might do better in this phase of the AI development, right? I mean, it's more use nudging rather than big stick. And by the way, I don't think we are going to have a totally consistent global governance on AI, because many of these AI applications are domestic, context specific. So I can imagine that there may be some applications in the European countries are governed in one way, in China another, and in US there's another. But at the same time, we also have some common risks that really, I think, threatens the existence of human beings. So those risks, and we have to work together. So we call that public good, AI safety as a global public good. I think it's those kind of risks, like the AI system out of control. I think we need to have global collaborations. Of course, we're also concerned about AI being used in the military in the conflict situations. And there again, I think there's a need to be a global governing regime to make sure that indeed will not be put into those kind of situations. This is another thing I always like to use, and what I call the regime complex. I think for people who study global governance, and this is a term people use it very often, regime complex is referring to the situation that you have some critical issues of global governance. You are not short of regimes governing this issue, but you have too many. Many of these regimes they have some say on this, and they wanted to govern the data part, they want to govern the computing power, and so on. So you have many overlapping regimes. Some of them are contradicting with one another, some other are overlapping, and so on. Unfortunately, these regimes, there's no hierarchical relationship. So you can't say my regime is on top of yours. So that's the challenging situation for AI governance. So I think we all agree that indeed UN system is still, we can say, for the huge major challenge that like the AI out of control should be, it should be the major platform. But at the same time, what kind of protocols to connect, say if we're going to develop a verifying system and a system to check about the safety of the system, you may want to have some other international body with more technical capabilities, such as ITU and others. And some people also say we may have to create another more technically competent agency. So I think that at the moment, certainly, I think it's something yet to be defined. And actually, we're working, I'm working with some international colleagues, and we're producing something for UN and to serve as an umbrella for global governance. At the moment, I think in terms of platform, we have UN and we have this AI Summit series started in UK and in Seoul and now in Paris. So I think that's another platform, and we have UNESCO and some other international. So we are not short of platform, but we to have more enforceable kind of mechanism to ensure the safety of AI.
Thank you, the Minister, for your kind invitation, and thank you for the organizer of the forum for this great gathering. It's a great pleasure to speak at this forum on Myanmar Beyond 2025, Challenges and Opportunities in a Multipolar World. And I will discuss 4 or 5 points for about 10 minutes. The first point is why a multipolar world is important. The answer is, in fact, very simple, because the opposite to multipolar world, that is unipolar world, is unjust, is outdated. Unipolarity literally means absolute power, which corrupts absolutely. In the unipolar world, sanctions, missiles, color revolutions, and even wars are the norms. And virtually everything from dollars to trade, to technologies, to climate change, can all be weaponized, which cause so many havocs and untold human sufferings for millions upon millions of people. My second point is a multipolar world has already emerged with the rise of China, Russia, India, the BRICS, and the ASEAN, and more. A multipolar world has already emerged. In the case of China, with 7 decades of socialist construction, China has become the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity since 2014. So it's already 11 years since China has become the world's largest economy by PPP. It's also the largest industrial, manufacturing, and trading nation in the world. It's also the world's largest consumer market. Amazingly, at the speed of roughly almost one industrial revolution, we accomplish almost one industrial revolution after another. Usually within 1 decade, we complete one industrial revolution. But China missed the first and second industrial revolutions due to historical reasons. But since the new China was founded in 1949, and with the first 30 years under Chairman Mao, we laid the foundation, economic, social, cultural, and other foundations. And then beginning from the reform era, tracing to 1978, with this 4 or 5 decades, roughly, we complete one revolution after another. So by now, China is at the forefront of the fourth and the new industrial revolution with big data, AI, and quantum technologies and more, as shown in the case of DeepSeek. Now China is also the only country capable of providing goods, services, and experiences from all the 4 industrial revolutions to the whole world. And all this has already shown a multipolar world has emerged. So this fact alone, the 4 industrial revolutions in one, also means China is already very different. The world is already different. The third point is the rise of China and Russia and more as civilizational states or as civilizational communities in the multipolar world. And this is important. As a full-fledged independent pole, China is also a civilizational state with full sovereignty, powerful defense capability, immense economic, technological, cultural, and intellectual power. We believe in the motto of unite and prosper, not divide and rule. We hate that. Yeah. Within China, we practice unite and prosper. In the international arena, we also advocate unite and prosper. We reject this Western belief in divide and rule. We embrace the idea of a shared future for mankind, not the American one. If you are not at the table, you are on the menu. Yeah. Likewise, despite the controversies over the Ukraine conflict, Russia's determined resolve to change the unipolar world is widely appreciated by the global South. And Russia is also a full-fledged independent power and with enormous power of a civilizational state. Same goes with the BRICS as a whole and with ASEAN as a whole. They are, I consider also as on the way towards civilizational communities. And my fourth point is, yes, a multipolar world is there, but a multipolar world order has not yet been achieved. That's something we should try to work together. And this forum is one of these interesting initiatives. And these poles, multi-poles, may have differences within themselves, yet importantly, they all share one common objective. That is, they want to establish a multipolar world order based on peace, development, based on mutual respect, based on common prosperity. And many of them also consider themselves as civilizational states or civilizational communities. The key difference between a civilizational state and civilizational community and typical what the Western call the nation state is with civilizational state and community, we have deep culture and deep people. That's different. I gave an interview the other day concerning this telephone call between the US and the Russian leaders. They said whether they are going to work together against China. I said no chance, because China and Russia are civilizational states. We have deep culture, deep people. United States, not yet. They have to work hard to achieve that. And another commonality is all these other poles and global South reject categorically the Western moral lecturing or imposition of its values on them. And indeed, I remember the former EU foreign, what's called the senior foreign minister, diplomatic representative, Joseph Borrell. He said this time last year, he said almost everyone in the non-Western world, in the global South, thinks now that there are credible alternatives to the West, not only economically, but also technologically, militarily, and ideologically. And this is very important. In other words, this unipolarity, this unipolar world order is based on these four pillars: technology, military, ideology, and economic. But even an EU foreign policy representative consider these four pillars have been shaken. So this is important. He admits this fact, which is true. And finally, I want to use, in order to build up this multipolar world order, I just share with you one quick example of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Basically, it's the today world's largest platform or common good for development and cooperation. Already over 150 countries participating, over close to 5,000 projects going on. And I think with this, we can see both hard power and soft power from China as a civilizational state. In terms of hard power, we can provide what we call total solution for industrialization. For instance, we can build up, say, a total solution to chemical industry for quite a few countries participating in BRI. Within 2 years, a complete industrial sector, petrochemical industry. Same with today, renewable energies, EVs, and many other sectors. With soft power, I mentioned already, we believe in unite and prosper, not divide and rule. We believe in shared future for mankind, not at the table or on the menu. And we also believe the key philosophy in the BRI initiative, why it can extend and spread so fast, the key philosophy behind this BRI is discussing together, building together, benefiting together. You join the initiative out of your own interest, not someone impose that on you. So that has even worked out better. In the end, I said this has created what I call a win-win cooperative multipolar world order, or at least lay a foundation for the new, what we envisage, a multipolar world order. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
And this was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and the future of the Asian Giant. Hope you enjoy it and see you next time.